We can actually now go back to our old diagram and ask ourselves who pays how much of a tax. Now that might seem like a silly question to you, because after all, why can't the seller or the supplier just pass on the whole tax onto the consumer or the buyer? But then, if he raises the price by the whole amount of the tax, obviously then quantity demanded is going to fall. And it might fall so much that his revenues are affected. Consequently, he might be better off trying to absorb a part of the tax himself and passing on only some of the tax onto the consumer. So when should he pass on more of the tax onto the buyer? Well, obviously when the buyer doesn't react too much. When will that happen? Well, you've guessed it, it's when the demand is relatively inelastic. So we can show all that with the help of our old demand and supply curves. So let's, as usual, draw demand and supply curves. Here is quantity on the horizontal axis, price on the vertical axis, and our demand curves without the taxes D0 and S0. So as before, the equilibrium is at a particular quantity Q0 and price P0. Now suppose there is an increase in taxes. Let's suppose that instead of the demand curve being looking like this, it's now much steeper. So let me change the demand curve to something like this. So now let's think about what happens if with the introduction of a tax, and the supply curve moves to the left to S1, and now you can see that the quantity has changed to Q1 and the price has changed to P1. The amount paid by the consumer is P1, but the amount received by the seller is only PS. So this is the amount of the tax, and this is the part which is paid by the consumer, and this is the part which is paid by the seller. Consequently, you can say that the more inelastic the demand curve, the larger will be the proportion of the tax paid by the buyer. The reverse would also be true. The more inelastic the supply curve, larger would be the proportion which is paid by the seller.